Welcome to Defense Disrupted. My name's Ian, and I am joined by an extraordinary technology innovator, Marina. Welcome to the podcast.
Ian, thanks so much for having me. It's been too long.
So I've known Marina for many years. This is a national security podcast where we're going to take a bit of a left turn into government innovation, because that is where Marina has extraordinary expertise, a lot of passion for helping others in extraordinary worlds. And we're going to dig into some of those examples here. Marina, you've had many titles. You have many jobs. One of them, just to give a little bit of a GovTech anchor, I believe, is that you were the CTO, Chief Technology Officer of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Is that true? Do I have the title right?
Yes. Yep. And I was also, that role also came with being a senior advisor to the secretary. So you got a couple hats.
You were at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I think you were at least either a deputy CTO or something like it as well. Is that right?
I was a senior advisor. Yeah. Nick stayed and became deputy CTO.
Another friend of the pod. But you were, in my mind, on the team that helped save Healthcare.gov. Is that a reasonable statement, even if you would say it differently?
Yeah. Well, on October 1st, when Healthcare.gov first crashed, there was also a government shutdown. So there were not very many of us around. And I was CTO of the VA. I was considered essential. And they were like, hey, you know probably how to turn on a computer. Can you go look under the covers there? So it was a really surreal moment.
You also, I'm going to keep bragging about you because I admire you so much. You were one of the youngest, if not the youngest, senior executive service SES appointees in the Obama administration, a role that tends to have tremendous influence, and it comes with a level of respect and clout. But I think not only were you one of the youngest technology innovators or really policy innovators, you also came from an unconventional background. And so my memory of you getting that appointment was half the people were super proud of you who knew you, and half the people were jealous, crazy, frustrated as hell. How the hell did Marina get that job? Don't you know? And they're like, well, what? Finish that sentence. What else are you going to say about her? And they're like, I just don't understand. How did she do it? How'd she get it? And in my mind, it's because you are just so damn brilliant and so successful that you earned it in ways that other people just couldn't understand. But I want to go back as I continue to brag about you. One more little piece of your bio and story. You were one of the first presidential innovation fellows, which is where I first met you.
And you were also one of the first.
Maybe I was lucky to be alongside you. And your story of how you came into the PIF program is really fun. I think it's a story worth sharing. Can you tell a little bit of how you got connected into the PIF program? Did you know what it was when you entered federal government service?
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy story. So I was a self-employed entrepreneur. I did a lot of business efficiency consulting in auto dealerships, actually, is what I was doing right before I joined the government. And I saw a link on Twitter to Todd Park, who was the CTO of the country at the time, talking at TechCrunch Disrupt about this new program. They were looking for tech-savvy entrepreneurs to come into government and disrupt it. And I was like, that sounds so amazing. And I suck because I'm so unqualified. I work in auto dealerships. I didn't finish college. I would never be picked. But I was on the mayor's technical advisory board in Seattle and working on open data. And it said, if you send in your resume to this program, you'd be added to the mailing list. And I thought this was some sort of federal government requirement. Like you can't even be on a mailing list without sending in your resume. But some little part of me had some hope. And I bought a $5 resume template on Graphic River that said, I'm Marina, in enormous blue letters at the top. And I sent it in expecting to hear nothing. And it turns out months later, when Richard Kulata was picking his presidential innovation fellow at the Department of Ed, he had a stack of resumes, as he tells it, and mine, being enormously blue, stood out to him. And he gave me a call on a Thursday and said, hey, I'd like you to be my PIF. And I was like, what? Like, I don't want to work at the Department of Education. And I have to be in DC on a Tuesday. I live in Seattle. This is crazy. And then I decided that was just crazy enough to say yes. And boy, did I catch the bug of like what you can do at scale in public service.
The work that you did starting with open data, it was almost like a pinball machine going backwards. Like you just went up, 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 up. Department of Education, OSTP, VA, saving an aspect, a very important aspect of our nation's healthcare system. And you've continued to do great things since then. You talk about business efficiency. I happen to know that you, I think, were the author or maybe a co-author of Business Efficiency for Dummies, which also doesn't really seem to be stereotypically aligned with government tech. Like these are contrasting elements, and so it's just kind of fun to see the breakthrough that allowed your brilliance to be recognized, but then also to create impact in a relatively short period of time, and your work continues. So one of the things I admire most about you, Marina, is that you are a fighter for foster care. You're a fighter for those that can fight for themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that work that you've been doing recently in that world since you left federal government work directly?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting going from the federal government to working with states because, I mean, there's a lot more of them, right? But also the scale is always smaller. So no matter what state you're in, you have fewer veterans than were at the VA, right? And so that can be helpful perspective of like, okay, we did this really hard thing for 20 million veterans. We could do this really hard thing for 400,000 kids in foster care. And so a lot of my work was using positive peer pressure to help nudge states in different directions. Hey, Michigan is doing this piece, California is doing this piece. And the key work was really around supporting relative caregivers. So when I started in foster care, it became really apparent very quickly that a lot of kids in care are placed with relatives. This is good. This is better on every outcome for them, for kids to be with adults that they know and love. But almost none of those relatives were getting any financial support, any access to daycare, any resources because they couldn't get licensed. And there was a federal regulation that said the licensing process, tuberculosis test, 40 hours of training, a recycling bin, a dog registration, all these requirements pile up. And these relatives literally can't get through it. And the foster care maintenance payments are not taxable, about $1,500 a month. That's a lot of money. So to me, that was a symbol that you couldn't get through the paperwork process while these caregivers are actually caring for kids in their home. So a lot of my work was saying, like, how do we redesign this process? How do we go talk to families living on permafrost in Alaska? Talk to cops who couldn't get licensed to be foster parents because they had to carry a gun for their job and the gun couldn't pass the foster parent licensing requirements. Families on Native American reservations where they didn't have recycling services couldn't get licensed because they didn't have a recycling bin. All these things, we did this tons and tons of national user research and then lifted up and said, hey, let's redesign this process. We actually got to write the new national model standards as a result of that. We had every single state on board. And by 2028, every state will have a new relative licensing process, which is unlocking $3 billion of support payments to these relative caregivers who already, again, have these kids in their home. That feels pretty good. It felt really good at the VA to enroll millions of veterans in healthcare. And it feels really good to keep so many more kids in foster care with adults that they know and love.
Wow. There's two aspects of the story that I think have a lot to teach the national security ecosystem. One is how to overcome stupid regulations and positive peer pressure. So let's dive into each of these separately.
Yeah.
Positive peer pressure. So that's an interesting way of branding the reluctance to change. My experience these days is more about risk. People are afraid of risk. Current operations are low risk. New things are new risk. We don't want new risk. So by definition, innovation is a threat, right? You wrote another book, and this is all me building up to maybe an announcement we'll be sharing in just a few minutes. Was it Hack Your Bureaucracy? What's the name of it? We're getting more into this. Yeah. So you co-wrote another book talking about with great stories of Find Your Paperclip, another of my favorite chapters from that story, from that book, about how to help people like take that fear of change into something that can be more leveraged. I think positive peer pressure is an example of that. It sounds like where you can basically say, like, follow the leader. New York's doing it this way. The VA has done it, so it's not that hard for you. It makes it feel less scary. Can you share more about what you've seen over your many years of GovTech innovation to help people be less scared of risk?
Yeah. So especially if you're in government, people are rules aligned, right? They are very concerned about, is the IG going to come after me? Is the GAO going to come after me? Is my performance plan going to be evaluated appropriately? And so there's a constant belief that I find people experiencing is that they try to make the bureaucracy care. They try to persuade it with emotions. I saw this at the VA all the time. I also definitely fell prey to this a lot, where I'd be like, veterans are literally dying, not being able to enroll in VA healthcare. We have to have a website that loads. I mean, that was the bar is in hell at this point. But like, we had a website to enroll in VA healthcare, and it did not open. And I'm not exaggerating in any way. And I would go around, screaming this, but there's no way for the bureaucracy to respond to that. And so the thing I had to really learn was, okay, if I want a website that loads and opens, what paperwork do I need to work my way through? And some of that was literally, one of them made me explain that I had jiggled the doorknob of Amazon Web Services to confirm it was locked. And I am guessing your audience knows that Amazon Web Services does not have a door in this proverbial sense. And so I begged and pleaded with the person who had to sign this paperwork. And they were like, I explained metaphorically how I had jiggled the doorknob. I made no progress until I literally had to go. I joined the committee over the form and had to change the form itself. And now I think the VA is literally the largest user of cloud computing because now the form, that person is never going to like emotionally be okay leaving a box unchecked or leaving it sort of half answered. You have to actually change what that process is. So to the extent that you can do that, if you're getting stuck in those pieces, and sometimes it just means slogging through the paperwork, and that's not a very exciting piece of advice. But so many people want to like emotionally argue their way past an ATO or through it, and the only way through it is through it.
The ATO, I think, is an acronym that this audience would understand as Authority to Operate as Cybersecurity Authorization. The average ATO paperwork, though, and process is not something London embraced by an admiral, a colonel, and who's trying to just be innovative, move fast, and then the system shows up. There's no incentive to be a master of those processes if you're a senior leader.
Yeah.
But you were senior leader in the master process. So, like, what's the therefore for how people can imitate your level of success? Is it learning Spanish is hard, but if you want to do it, if you want to succeed, you just got to learn that language, do the weekend boot course, and just like get through, and that's the only way. Like, how can folks that are told culturally you're a senior, you're an SCS political appointee, you're not supposed to join this committee, it's beneath you, we can't let you do it, ma'am. That I'm your chief of staff, that it's a terrible signal if you to join this. They won't tell the truth if you're there because they're afraid of being fired. Like, how would you overcome that when so many people saying don't do that?
Yeah, it's a real mix. I mean, part of it is really building your cuirass, which is something Nick and I talk about in the book. Your cuirass is like the people, and a cuirass is fundamentally across all silos. So you want your cuirass. I mean, literally, my cuirass at the VA included our security guards and our executive secretariat. It is not simply like the peers immediately around you, because there's some combination of you're going to have to fill out the ATO paperwork, but then also what's the literal rule that you have to follow, and how might you flexibly get around it? We made tons of progress at the VA by reading the literal letter of the regulation and saying like, oh, okay, we can put a website on the internet as long as it didn't have PII on it. So we found every possible use case that did not involve PII to get up first, so we could work through all those other hurdles. So we didn't have to take on kind of eating the whole elephant at once. But in terms of like not wanting to go to that meeting, man, if I'm a leader, I want to go not just go to the meeting that might be like a level or two below you. I want to go out in the field. And you've always been incredible at this, Ian. But like, you have to go sit on the bench, sit with a warfighter, watch what their experience is. You cannot go to I don't know how to be a leader who doesn't do that. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a fault of mine, but that's what I would do.
It's my style as well. I think as an honest confession reaction to your compliment, there's a player coach aspect to what I think has made my jobs fun. And as my business has changed, as my company has changed, as my leadership changed, when I show up, people get super weird now in some places that they're not. It's funny how I can't just show up and fix something the way I may be capable of, but actually showing up is the disruption. Like, it actually can be counterproductive. What I admire about a lot of the leaders that have come through conversations like these is that they find a way to connect with the front line without disturbing the front line.
Yeah.
And that's more artistry. It's leadership. And by the way, I think it changes the way you look, changes the way you show up to certain things, like what you wear. It's really funny how invasive good leadership can be, or how offensive maybe it can be sometimes.
That's such an important point, and I've experienced that a lot. And I remember once, one of my very first site visits to the Salt Lake City regional office in the VA, and I knew it was trepidatious because I show up, I have a reserved parking spot. There's like a greeting.
Right. You can't, as soon as you show up. Yeah.
But thank God, this gentleman who was driving the golf cart, driving me around, he gave me a blinky children's ring, like the kind you get out of the 25-cent little thing. And I was like, I'm going to try this. So I put the blinky ring on, and I just like used that to be like, take me down like 10 pegs, guys. Like, I really want to. And then I tried to find the people in the field that would, I just tried to make it as clear as I could. And it works different with different people, that I was there to truly help and truly understand, and not there to be like, oh my God, you clicked that button wrong, I'm sending you to the inspector general. And that took a long time to build those relationships. Yeah. What helped, I think, too, there is, instead of going out saying, I want to understand, what's wrong or what could be fixed, I would really try to say, like, I love this question, which is, tell me a mystery about your role. And you say a mystery or say some sort of complaint, which could include, and I've done this a few times now, like the coffee machine is broken. If I go fix the coffee machine, that has nothing to do with anything, right? But then I'm I am the person that fixed the coffee machine after 5 years. That raises a lot of eyebrows in a good way, in my experience. So I always try to find that small thing that I am listening, that I'm showing up, and then maybe they'll reach out with the next thing, or maybe I can ask them the question and they'll answer it. It's definitely really hard, and it's definitely art.
Let's shift over to the stupid regulations category. Ultimately, there are these requirements like a police officer cannot foster a child because they carry a weapon at work. Changing those regulations is usually quite difficult. The perception of those regs is usually different than the actual. And I'll give you in the military world, people are allowed to contract a certain way, but most of them don't know how to do it, so they don't even use the regs that are already there. And to do so is more work than not getting paid for it. So it's like this frozen middle that comes up time and time again
Yeah.
for national security startups. And that's well covered. So I'm going to ask you more of a personal question. And I asked this accidentally of our former boss, Nick Sinai, and I think he got a little offended by it. But I didn't mean it in the way that it came across. It was a curiosity about what I loosely just contrast between rip the band-aid off, burn it down, and figure out later versus incrementalism. So changing regulations, there's know the rule, work around it a little bit. We're in a time of, in the federal government technology ecosystem, broad transformation, whether you love it or hate it, things are changing. And I think personally, and we'll get to the question, the intent of change can be good. We want government to be efficient. Who would be opposed to the concept of Doge? But I think, where that efficiency is wielded, I think is got reasonable questions. But as you look back into your years of government service, do you see a similar change in tone? It's a burn it down first, do it later. Do you wish you could have gone Doji back when you were in the federal government and had what I loosely call as the latitude and flexibility to, hey, you know what? If I had that much power, I would have done blank. Like, when you look back on those experiences, do you see that contrast and have any desire for those types of techniques?
Oh my gosh, yes. I think about this a lot lately. And a couple thoughts. So one is, every once in a while somebody is like, "Oh, I might, be throwing my hat in to be the next secretary of the VA. Would you come be my CIO?" And I always have the same reaction. "Oh my gosh, it would be so exciting to work for blank." But then I also stop and remind myself that I had nothing but absolutely amazing bosses all the way up through the president when I was there. And we were not able to get things done because culturally in our administration, you followed rules and processes. Like, if I had blown something up or gone around the ATO process, I would have embarrassed my amazing bosses and I would have been fired. There wasn't a possibility of getting things done. But unfortunately, the side effect of that, of being so aligned to completing processes and not achieving outcomes, has led most people now to want to blow up the federal government. And that is why now they are able to get way more done now. And I want that in many cases, in the sense of making procurement more streamlined, serving more people. Absolutely, if I was not subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act, I would have saved more veterans' lives. And I will say that I am not going to be as tolerant, and I hope that we are not as tolerant again of the ways that regulations and policies stand in the way of serving people. They can be protective too. I want to be clear about that. But they are often standing in the way of serving, and we have to put that outcome, which most places in the government don't even measure, right? We need to be measuring and holding that as our North Star. We can all disagree about what the government should do. That if we have agreed it's going to do X, it needs to be able to do X. That's kind of the hill I'm going to die on going forward.
Do you feel like most government services can measure those outcomes? In my experience, yeah.
But it's not impossible.
Yeah, see, where have you worked?
It's not impossible. It's certainly possible, but we have to make some core changes to do that.
Yeah.
And I think an opening to do that is when we have a crisis that's going to crack open, the way that our organization works for some short period of time. That's a great moment to say, and I've seen this happen in California for the unemployment claims backlog in the height of the pandemic. When my team was brought in to work on that, they were not measuring the backlog. And then when they did measure the backlog, and they weren't measuring how long it was going to take it down. When we did that, it was going to take 48 years to work it down, which is such an unacceptable number that it then opened them up to make a lot of fundamental claimant-facing changes that work that backlog down instead in 3 months. Because that crisis opened it up to say we have to measure outcomes.
Well, let's keep going on that. I didn't know that story. That's fascinating. I think it fits in with the kind of a worldview that as I get older and more frustrated and bitter and salty, I'm just like, well, it's all just about power here. There's good intentions going to take us so far. But I think there's an element of that story that maps into that my curmudgeon-y growing nature in that area, where compelling data, it sounds like, was provided to leadership. and then leadership created a crisis. I think crises are interesting. I think they obviously the nature of it is dangerous, but government crises can create opportunities. I think I know that you and I have responded to government crises and seen them as opportunities for improvement. We're firefighters in a way, GovTech firefighters is maybe something that you and I have in common. And I think you have really pioneered a method for how to take advantage of a crisis to deliver good things. So can you share more about like some of your past experiences there? I mean, the Healthcare.gov is well covered by much better podcasts than ours, but like some things since then, I think it's seen a lot more sense.
Yeah. I mean, something that frustrated me a great deal when I was in government, and we ended up being some combination of like years of experience and then actually going back to some 1960s academic research was, and healthcare.gov actually was a great example of this. On October 1st, so CNN is like 24/7, they're refreshing healthcare.gov and it's not loading. Nobody can enroll in healthcare in America through the Affordable Care Act and the website. But at the healthcare.gov building, nobody was there. There was a conference call at like 4:30, and the plan was to have another conference call the next day at 4:30. So they were not perceiving it as a crisis there. And I feel like at the VA, I would also experience this a lot. The disability claims backlog, there's offices literally collapsing under the weight of unprocessed paper claims. And we're going to have a Tuesday meeting about this was like the firm crisis response. Things were moseying along as normal. But then I saw something different when there was the healthcare application backlog at the VA. So we're on the front page of the New York Times. The IG found that over 100,000 veterans had died waiting for their application to be processed. And one can assume that many of those veterans would not have died if they had access to healthcare, right? Maybe not all 100,000, but even one is unacceptable. But VA was about to treat it normally. They were about to say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do mandatory overtime. That's like our normal tool. And then this switch flipped, which was this veteran named Dominic. We had recorded him trying and failing 12 times to enroll in VA healthcare. And he described the experience as like going through a door spiked with bombs and IEDs. This is a veteran experience encompasses. And the president saw it. And this took the visibility off, like off to the races of this crisis in a new way. And VA was suddenly like, oh, maybe Marina, we're willing to let you use that like fancy website form idea. And literally all I was doing was putting form on the internet. I don't want anybody to think I was doing rocket science here. At the time, 8 veterans had ever enrolled for VA healthcare online, despite we spending $4 million a year on an online form. Today, almost 3 million have enrolled using that same simple form.
I used your one form, by the way.
See, yes. Okay, we have an additional one.
The 3 million in one. Yeah. 4 million, whatever it is. Yeah.
But that was the thing VA was unwilling to do, and they kept arguing because it was a non-crisis and it was an argument. They said if 8 veterans out of 20 million have used this online website, obviously that shows that veterans don't use the internet. And I couldn't. Then I'm just debating back, right? Like a high school debate class. What helped was Dominic breaking through people's story of what was actually happening. And he was like, I am a super tech savvy, like smart, funny veteran who needs help. And I've tried 12 times now and I still can't get through. And that cracked people's sense of what was happening open just wide enough and just long enough to let us try something new.
There is a celebrity factor, in this case being the president of the United States at that time, calling attention to this dynamic, which then drove leverage and basically operational influence. I think leadership matters in government. I think leadership can force resources and attention and focus. I think that's a form of crisis. There's natural disaster type crises, which can get into the well-covered stories of National Weather Service, innovations, or FEMA and things like it. I think one that we see a lot now, I think it's relatively appropriate. It's not too timely, but or timeless, but it's a little interesting. There's a lot of, in the military, operational requirements. A lot of conflicts in foreign nations right now, which are driving a new level of urgency of, hey, so this unit is getting on a plane in 48 hours. What gear are they taking with them? Do they have the right tools for their job? And that's another form of power and urgency that becomes a kind of crisis. I don't mean to say that all wartime operations are crises per se, but it could certainly feel like that for the average family who's trying to figure out, all right, spring break plans canceled because dad's got to go to so-and-so.
Yeah.
So it can feel crises level to then it's bizarre in a way. Like in theory, the aperture for new things would go down if the human body is, fearfully responding to being dropped on something. But I do think in the biology of government operations, I think there's actually more of an opening. because they cannot respond fast enough to then bring in the firefighting equipment. And it can lead to new types of influence, like I think you demonstrated here. I don't know if
Yeah.
that, I don't know if that metaphor translates some kind of that biology, but I'm trying to trying to think through like how we've been able to do this so often in government.
Yeah.
And I think it's because
I mean,
of
this
Christ.
can work outside of government too, but so we, going back through the research, thinking about it, we ended up figuring out, or we have a hypothesis that there's 5 indicators of crisis. You need most, but not all. So I'll walk you through quickly.
Yeah.
Like you think that they're right. One is fundamental surprise. So you have to be like, whoa, I did not see this coming. So yes, certainly a foreign conflict. Maybe a few people in a meeting room knew it was happening tomorrow, but generally speaking, we didn't. You need a core like your core function needs to be like disrupted or really, really slow. So you can't fulfill claims anymore, right? You have been attacked. A breakdown of sense making. So that's the piece back where I think that really came down to that healthcare application. It was the president adding that visibility. And that's the 4th piece is high visibility. You're on the front page of the New York Times. You're being discussed all the time. But the breakdown of sense making was the VA was thought everything was fine and operating as normal, and that veterans didn't use the internet, which is why only 8 had ever enrolled. Seeing Dominic broke their story for a minute, and then they have cognitive dissonance that they desperately need to fix. So that's your window. That's this magic window, government or not, where you can say, okay, you can't do this. The world is not working the way that you thought it worked 5 minutes ago. Or, if you know Daniel Kahneman's like system 1 and system 2 thinking, like this comes in, it's very expensive for our brain to be like regenerating the world around us all the time. It wants to go back to system 1. How can you leverage that window with the new change that you want to see, the new procurement, the new tool to the warfighter, whatever it may be? The 5th indicator, which really applies here, is a rigid timeline. Right. The Taylor Swift concert is happening. Your team is deploying in 48 hours. It's funny because people often think that they're like, oh, like tax day. So we actually look, the IRS moves tax day like every 3 years. They're like, there was a hurricane somewhere. Like it can be the 18th. It's no problem. But you're deploying in 48 hours, I imagine, is you're deploying in 48 hours.
These 5 frameworks that you outlined are things that I want to study more. By chance, are you about to, or have you just launched a new book that can maybe codify these techniques and frameworks so that people can either better prepare for crises or take advantage of them?
Yes, in fact, I have a new book, Crisis Engineering, out April 7th, where it walks through what the indicators of crisis are, a couple deep case studies, so one on 3 Mile Island and one on Healthcare.gov, and then a really practical toolkit based on ways that we've seen be effective to stand up a crisis response, stand up a crisis engineering center. I hope you read the book before your next crisis, so you've got a few tools in your toolkit. But if not, you can also skim it really fast and find out a way.
Turn it into an LLM. Just real quick. Based on this, if I'm talking to Marina Martin, she wrote this book. What would I do right now? That's probably like 45 seconds. I don't know if it's an IP violation, but
exactly. But are really what we want way more people to be good at right now in a world where there are just more and more crises and the stakes are higher and higher is the crisis is going to end. Your company's going to go out of business. The event is going to happen. Your team deployed whether it did or not. Or what is actually much more common is we kind of powered through the crisis, but that underlying opportunity or problem is still there. Yep. It's ossified even worse. But that crisis can be this really magical window to get huge change through. That bridge collapse, obviously bridge collapses are bad, but if a bridge collapses, that's the moment when if you've got that procurement reform or the way to skip the 7 useless NIMBY reviews that they've thrown in, that's the time to say all right, we're going to not do this to repair the bridge in 6 days. And then we're actually permanently not going to do this anymore because we were able to rebuild the bridge this time. And that shows that we don't actually need it the rest of the time too. So I want way more people to be ready to capitalize on that. And for the warfighter, I imagine there's a lot of opportunity right now to say hey, we don't have a year to sit around a table and think about this. How do we get them the best possible tools so that they can work and they can survive and win?
That's right. Thank you for announcing your book. We will definitely have the link in this podcast. I have read both of your other books. Maybe you have more than 2. I don't even know.
Oh, this is my 3rd. So my last, I swear to my
I don't believe that. And maybe fair. And you have the strongest of integrity. I do hope that the 4th book is written about you, not just by you. I think your impacts on the world are extraordinary. Lives have been saved because of your work. The VA and the veteran community is better cared for because of your pioneering innovations. On behalf of the veteran community, thank you for what you've done for those that have served. And thank you for continuing to fight for so many people who need to have public services work better. You've been a builder, a leader, and one more time, an author. So thank you for sharing that announcement. We'll make sure the folks that are inspired by your methods get a chance to learn more about how to do it in their own lives. So Marina, I've known you for years. I've been inspired by you for years. What do you think, as final question, what do you think your next great adventure is going to be after this this book tour has come to a close? Are you daydreaming about a life back in government by chance? Or you're like, oh, I'm good for now. I don't want to be the CIO of the VA, because it sounds like you've got at least a couple of offers on that one.
I really, really want to help us work on this on government capacity, whether that's in state level, regardless of administration. I think there's so much opportunity that we have learned the government is not achieving the outcomes it needs to achieve. And I don't think that has to be or should be partisan. And so I'm really, really interested in really rolling up my sleeves and helping more there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marina, for everything you've been leading. We're going to continue following you in your great breakthroughs and innovations. And thank you so much for sharing a few stories on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I've really missed you. It's really great being here.